And I'm Tua Tusa. Welcome to Spotlight on New Zealand. Tonight, we focus on New Zealand's greatest tragedy. Go, carry on.
Throughout tonight's show, we will try to find out as much as possible about the disaster so we, as a nation, can begin to understand this terrible tragedy. On the morning of the 10th of April 1968, after an overnight voyage from Littleton, the ferry Wahine encountered the worst of a violent southerly storm, with winds gusting 160 kilometres per hour while entering the Wellington harbour. With passengers terrified and feeling very ill indeed, the captain and his crew attempted to get their ship back on course and out of danger. After many hours, the passengers and crew had to abandon ship and were flung out onto the rough seas of the harbour in life rafts. They had to make the perilous crossing to Wellington's rocky shores, where they were met by local Wellingtonians desperate to help. These rescuers could see the state of the harbour and understood how difficult the crossing had become, perhaps even before those on board had realised. We are lucky enough tonight to have footage recovered of a resident in the seaside village of Eastbourne back in 1968. They were among the many heroic rescuers on that fateful day. Here's Wellington correspondent Isabel Murray with her 1968 report.
Hi, I'm Isabel, and this is Livy and David, two very heroic rescuers from today's tragic event. Thank you for joining us today. You must be exhausted.
Yes, I am so exhausted from all the swimming I did.
So, Livy, how did you know to go and rescue people?
Well, the waves were unnaturally big, and I got a call from the control tower saying the Wahine was sinking. So I got my team together and started the boat.
And you, David?
A person told me that a person was washed up on the shore, and he told me that the Wahine had sunk. So I hopped in my boat and I went to rescue some people.
Very courageous. And David, being in a smaller boat, did that make you feel like you were in more danger?
Yeah, I was terrified because the waves were much bigger than my boat. So every time a wave went past, I felt like if I was going to be toppled over.
Wow. And Livy, what did you see out there?
At first I saw nothing because of the huge waves, and then, in the distance, I saw the Wahine sinking. It was a devastating sight.
Thank you. Signing off on this, from this tragic day of New Zealand history.
An interesting interview. Our thanks to Isabel Murray for sending us the old report. Those unfortunate enough to be on the Wahine on the 10th of April 1968 had to deal with the very rough and night and day. Many passengers were thrown up and continuously on those extremely rough seas. The passengers were all told that the storm would pass and to hold on tight. Most thought it was a typical Wellington southerly storm and that the Wahine would ride it out. Unfortunately, at 6:41 a.m., the Wahine was carried onto the Barrier Reef, sustaining serious damage to the length of her hull. The starboard, that's right to us landlubbers, and the port, that's left. The engine stopped working and the anchors were dropped, but it was some time before they were held firm. Rescue attempts were made impossible by the raging gales and the massive swells, but early on afternoon, all 734 passengers and crew were ordered to abandon ship and get into the life rafts. Only 4 of the 8 rafts could be used because of the angle of the now sinking ship. All 734 passengers on the ship managed to escape, but due to the stormy seas, 51 lost their lives. We can only imagine that those giant waves looked like to those people in the small rafts, or worse, for those who capsized. Our film technicians have found some more damaged footage of our 2 survivors, filmed only hours after the disaster in a silver fence shelter. We have carefully cleaned and restored the film. This is the first time it has been shown to the New Zealand public. Let's roll the footage.
How are you? Are you okay? Oh gosh, are you warm enough? Okay, are we rolling? Right. I'm Esme Wiskin, and joining me now is a survivor of today's disaster. Did it come as a big shock to you when the ship sank?
Well, when we got the order that the ship was sinking, I was kind of scared.
Yeah, it must have been huge. Do you think the crew behaved appropriately when the messages were issued?
Yes, I thought they behaved very well when they issued the warning, because they kept us safe and calm.
So you weren't angry with them?
No, they were cool.
Were any of your family members on the ship with you?
No, I was just going over for my friend's 21st birthday.
Yeah, it would have been great. And we're out of time. Get this person a hot drink.
A fascinating piece of New Zealand history. We are so lucky to have such amazing technology that allows us to still view it. And now, let us look at human error being the possible reason for the sinking of the Wahine. Captain Hector Gordon Robertson had been master of the ill-fated ferry for some time. He had sailed her to and from Wellington numerous times in strong winds and high seas, and was an experienced captain. It was Captain Robertson's decision to enter the harbour when they did. They had arrived 20 minutes behind schedule when freak gusts of 100 knots or more struck the vessel and put them out of time. He was quoted at the time as saying, "If those winds had struck 5 minutes later, we would have been through the entrance and could have come down the harbour. We could have come down and dropped anchor in Oriental Bay, where it was quite calm." Some people suggested that Captain Robertson was too late in his decision to put the passengers into the life rafts. They had suggested they should have been evacuated much earlier. Captain Robertson, however, feels he made the right decision, saying, "People who say that don't know what they are talking about. If I had put them off any earlier, every one would have been lost. I would have had 600 lives on my conscience." In a moment, we will take a closer look at the weather on that fateful day. But now, let's look at an interview given by Anthony Coles in 1972. The interview may give us some insight as to what was happening on the bridge that day.
Hello, I'm Anthony Coles, and here is Captain Robertson and Connor McCarthy, one of the crew members. So, Captain Robertson, why did you leave from Christchurch to Wellington when you knew a storm was going to hit?
Well, actually, Anthony, I did not know that the storm was going to hit Wellington, as the weather forecast had said that the storm was supposed to be stopping at Gisborne and drifting off to sea, not coming all the way down to Wellington. As I found out later on, though, another storm came up, collided, and had a crash course straight for Wellington Harbour.
If you had anything to change, if you could change it, what would you have changed?
Well, Anthony, I wouldn't have changed anything. I followed all the rules in the book. I put anchors down, I called tugboats, the anchors snapped, the tugboat wire snapped. That's something that I cannot fix. Also, the radar went down. I couldn't see a thing, as you know how big the waves were.
Thank you. And Connor, you were in the engine box, but you were getting thrown around. How did you feel, not knowing what was out there?
I thought the captain was the captain was devastated because he was he made the wrong decisions.
Okay. Thank you, Connor, and thank you, Captain Robertson. I'm Anthony Coles.
Fascinating old footage there. Let's look at the weather on the 10th of April 1968. It certainly was a terrible day to be stuck outside in New Zealand. Cyclone Gazelle was first reported on the 5th of April 1968 when it hit French Caledonia with storm warnings issued throughout New Zealand the next day. Early on the 9th of April, Cyclone Gazelle hit Cape Reinga. Winds of up to 160 kilometers an hour caused massive damage to buildings. Torrential rain flooded farmland in Northland, drowning hundreds of farm animals. A farmer was also killed when he was blown off a haystack. The cyclone's pattern of damage continued as it travelled across the North Island but turned south down the east coast. Ships were driven ashore and landslips closed roads. Rain caused massive flooding and wind left roofs torn off and windows broken. By the time Cyclone Gazelle hit Wellington on the morning of the 10th of April, another storm had driven up the west coast of the South Island from Antarctica. The two storms met over the capital, causing huge damage. Winds in Wellington were the strongest ever recorded, at one point reaching speeds of 275 kilometres an hour. As the storm moved on to the South Island, hundreds of Christchurch houses lost their roofs and both the Avon and the Heathcote rivers flooded. Throughout Canterbury, over 500 hectares of forest were destroyed. In Southland, the flooding was the worst since 1913. Some people were stranded on the roofs of their houses and had to be rescued by jet boat. Cyclone Gazelle finally blew out somewhere in the Southern Ocean. And there you have it, folks. Perhaps if weather forecasting could have been what it is now, the Wahine disaster would have never happened. Back to you in the studio. What an incredible storm it must have been.
Well, that's all we have time for this evening. We hope you have learned something about your country's history and about one of the darkest days.
Please join us next week when we focus on the Springbok Tour of 1981. Thank you all for watching, and we'll see you again next time.
From the whole team at Spotlight on New Zealand,
goodbye.
E nohora.
E nohora.
Roll the camera. Okay.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Tonight we are featuring an interview with a very peculiar-looking gentleman.
Scene 1, take 1.